welcome to another episode of our developer interview series here on Game Wisdom for the Perceptive podcast. For tonight, we're going to be talking music, specifically adaptive music, when it comes to games and trying to get that feel of music to perfectly mesh with the gameplay that's going on. My guest tonight is the composer from the recently released Mouse PI game, that by the time you're watching this on the channel, we should have the game already finished. But please welcome to the cast, adaptive music designer and composer, Patryk. How are you doing?
Hi, Josh. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I am doing all right. For those of you watching this right now, this is another late night recording for me. Not as late night as another one that I did, so I should be at least a little bit more alert and attentive for our conversation. But thank you so much for reaching out and wanting to come on to chat about your work. And for all of you watching, if you're interested in coming on to talk about game dev or any aspect when it comes to game design, be sure to reach out in all the many ways possible. But it is a delight to have you on. So, to get the ball rolling, since this is your first time on the cast, could you give yourself a little introduction and talk about your background when it comes to game dev?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me in the first place. But when it comes to my first steps in game dev, it's quite difficult for me to specifically pick a date because the transition for me to go to game dev to game industry was quite long and quite smooth as well. I remember I started working on some first games back in 2006, I believe, or seven, when I was still at university. But back then, because I'm from Poland, the industry here was quite small. It's nothing like it's today. But I remember when I started, most of the games that were developed here were mostly like mobile, like small arcade games and things like, even Flash games. I remember Flash doesn't exist anymore, but it was a tool for many small game developers to, to create something, to make some small arcade type of games that could be available online. And I believe those games also worked on some mobiles at that time. Yeah, but that was like the first contact with games. And for many years, I've been working on things like production music, trailer music, things that are almost not related to games at all. And then smoothly, gradually finding some new opportunities brought me up to to where I'm today. And I mostly work on games which are made by Polish studios, but not only. There are a few exceptions. And of course, recently, some of those projects got bigger and bigger, and right now I'm very excited about all of the projects I'm working on, which I can't talk about right now. But yeah, they're really cool. Some of the games that you may seen maybe a couple of years ago, which I'm kind of proud of. Mostly the one, My Memory of Us. It's a game that was I believe that I worked on that since 2016 or 15. I can't remember when we actually started, but it was somewhere around then. Uh, the game was actually really beautiful, and I remember that many people really loved it, and it was in a way probably combined a little bit with the fact that we had a really beautiful voiceover made by Sir Patrick Stewart. And I remember that when I was making music for this game, I was I was literally crying when I was trying to compose some cues because his voice and his voice acting was just so awesome, and also um, so sad because the game was actually the setting of the game was actually quite sad and emotional. Yeah, so that's the game that I was really proud of, and still am today, because it's still one of my favorites. And after that, I worked on many others, including quite nice looking and quite fun game that you also may saw somewhere, which is called KO the Kangaroo. It's well, it's targeted for children
Mhm.
probably, but it's also quite fun to play for adults, I believe. Um, yeah, and it's quite fun and colorful, and playful and so on. And I had a really great time working on the music for it, because I just felt like I'm 100% uh, just enjoying the process, and not really bending over backwards when trying to figure out how to do it. And it was really nice time spent on that project. Yeah, and now we are today, many other games later, and a few days ago, Mouse PI for Hire was released, which is the most recent project of mine, outside of those which are in development right now, which I can't talk about. But this one I'm also really proud of, because it was quite a challenge. Yeah, it was quite a challenge to work on that one.
Mhm. Yep. And we'll be talking a lot more about that in the next few minutes. But yeah, going back to what you were saying a few minutes ago about like how much the state of game dev has changed in Poland over the years. Like for longtime fans, they always know that I like to ask developers about kind of like, especially international guests, about what the game dev space is like. And like hearing how much it has grown, as you were saying, like when you first started there wasn't too many and now it's gotten a lot bigger. I guess like for like people like listening to us right now, are there any other like notable studios in Poland that they may recognize or they should check out?
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Well, the industry grew up significantly. It's like night and day. I believe the beginnings were, well, probably, as you can imagine, almost like garage type of development studios. And right now it's huge. It's super professional, and there are many studios that are quite recognizable around the world. Probably everybody knows CD Projekt, because they made Witcher and Cyberpunk. But there are some others, like People Can Fly, which works with Microsoft on many titles. There is 11-bit Studios, which created Frostpunk, for instance, and Alters quite recently. Bloober, which recently made this Silent Hill 2 remake, and last year Chronos. Techland, which made a lot of different games, um, things like Dead Island and uh, Dying Light. There are a lot of titles they worked on, mostly horror recently, but they didn't start with horror actually. They started with completely different things. Yeah, and probably many others that you can find familiar. Those projects that they created may sound familiar to you, but yeah, I think I already mentioned those most significant ones, probably.
And at this time, I still haven't played the new Silent Hill game, but it is on my list. And yeah, of course, Witcher, Frostpunk. Did they also do This War of Mine? I always forget.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true.
And I guess, like, for yourself, then, when you, on the first game that you mentioned, My Memory of Us, were you making use of adaptive music at that point, or did that come, like, later?
Oh yeah, totally. I was an adaptive music fan from very start. The moment that I've discovered that we can actually now control what happens with the music in a game, I was totally in it, because beginnings of the music in games was well, maybe a little bit later than 8-bit kind of music, but from the, let's say, CD-ROM era, the music started to be pre-recorded, because previously, in the old days, you would have music that was generated with a chip that you had on your computer, or maybe on your console. And when the music was able to, when developers was able to put the WAV files or MP3 or whatever, on CD-ROMs, it changed drastically. But that process was also a little bit difficult to implement. I mean, the type of the music was quite difficult to implement in the game, because you had those huge files and the looping wasn't that great, and controlling what's played at certain time wasn't that smooth. I mean, those transitions were not those that smooth as we have today. So I remember when I started working on some more serious productions, the first thing that I fell in love to was, making the music adaptive and creating those transitions, programming all of those things, all of those pieces of the puzzle, so they work together. Of course, it's still challenging because we still have some limitations, but it's not even close to what we've seen like 20 years ago. So that's one of the favorite things that I'd like to do in game production, that I can actually design the system, and I can create some blocks, and I can try to play around with those to see how it sounds, and also to come up with some ideas what we can do with music to make the gameplay a little bit more exciting than just playing simple loop all the time, because this is something that probably mm, many people, and maybe even some small developers may think about music, that you just simply play a loop and that's it. While these days it's far beyond that. It's like you can almost design an entire music world, and there are a couple of examples that actually prove that. Um, yeah.
And like from like my own perspective, especially someone who's grew up playing so many video games, it's been very fascinating to see just how much music has really evolved, especially I would say over the last like 15 years. Not only with more indie developers, of course, doing amazing things with not only game design, but having more creative music and soundtracks. Again, like I think everyone will go with the easy example, something like Undertale. Then we of course have even like in the mobile space, it's been very fascinating. Like for people watching, they know, or if you haven't known that, I did a lot of research into kind of the mobile and live service side. And there are so many mobile games these days that seem to just like hit it out of the park with music. Obviously not on the adaptive side, but you have stuff like Project Moon, who's been doing a lot of stuff with like I think the band Melee. I completely butcher their name every time I say it. And the kind of point I want to get to is that I think like a lot of things that we talk about in terms of elevating video games as a art form, as a medium, music has I think really gotten a huge impact or this time period. I think more and more people are realizing that there's more to video game music and sound than just generic chip tunes or just like the same like three notes repeating again and again, as a few of my fans have seen some of the games that we've played.
Yeah, it's changing all the time, and it's something that I could probably spend hours and hours talking about, but I'm just curious how you and other people's react to the music. It's something
Hmm.
that it's really hard um uh to examine, because we have no research in that field, so it's very often like shooting blind, trying different
Hmm.
ideas and seeing what happens. Because there's a lot of data regarding things like storytelling and gameplay, and things that are much more technical probably, and maybe a little bit less emotional. And in this case, in this part, uh, I would really love to know how people react to certain types of music, and to have some sort of like comparison, so that we could actually tell that, oh, okay, so if we use this, it works like that.
Mhm.
And most of the time we have to guess. So probably this is the most challenging part.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's how it is.
And I guess like from like your own perspective, or like obviously you worked on Mouse PI, it was kind of like more like jazz, like big band style music. Is there a particular genre of music that you like to work in, or is it just like you're very adaptive at the music that you can work in?
Oh, that's a really nice question. To be honest, I probably feel most at home with more like orchestral type of and cinematic type of music, uh, because this is something that I grew up on and listening to. Also watching films, with very live and emotional music of composers like Alan Silvestri, John Williams, James Horner, those guys. And this is something that I really love and enjoy, and also try to somehow find opportunities that would allow me to do things like that. But of course, game dev is very diverse when it comes to game styles, and also not every game require this kind of sound. Mouse PI for Hire is one of the examples, but I worked on so many games that are completely different. Even like 2 years ago, I remember I think we finished a game that's called Slavic Punk, called Timer, and this was like, very electronic, heavy kind of music that I also really enjoyed, but it was completely different. It was like when it comes to the music style, I wouldn't use any of my previous chops to do it because it was so different. And the same thing goes with almost any other game that I worked on. I don't know if this is a blessing of or this is a curse, but very often when I start a new project, it's completely different from another, from the previous one, which is very challenging because you have to wrap your head around a completely different style. And it's quite often for me, or rather common for me, to start a project, and to which requires, that was the word I was looking for, which requires music in a style that I never worked on. So it's, every single time it's like going back to the first class and starting learning everything from scratch. Yeah, so it's quite common. It is great, because it's something that allows me to not only learn but also to simply not get bored. Uh, I very often think that I would love to work on mostly on orchestral and cinematic type of music, but if I really would do only that, probably it would be quite boring. So I don't know which one is better. If it's working on a completely different thing every single time, or working only on single genre. I don't know.
And I guess like for people listening to us, we actually forgot to mention this already, but for them, what is considered adaptive music? Like, how you define that? Like, when it comes to a video game,
How do I define what? Come again,
adaptive
please,
music
because
is, or like what it
oh,
does.
adaptive music. Oh yeah, 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 adaptive music. Well, yeah, I think it's like, I'm not sure if there's one description that's like the only true one. I believe that I've heard many years ago from some other very experienced composer that interactive music is the music that is based on players' interactions, which means that you press a button and something happens. So because that's like the direct interaction. Whereas adaptive music, it doesn't interact to the player behavior, but it actually adapts to what's happening in the game. And in this case, it means that when you change environment, or maybe something happens that it's not really related to the player's action, but it's related more to an environment action, or maybe scripted action, like a boss coming out of you on you, or something else happens. So this is more like adaptive, that music reacts to what's going on in the game.
Mhm. And from my own experience with it, I think the first example that I ran into would be the game Payday 2, which had kind of that effect where the music will of course change based on whether you're in the middle, where you're in the stealth part of the heist, when it goes loud, when there's a raid going on. And in that respect, it was kind of kept to like those basic elements. And
Hmm.
I guess from like your own perspective, from your own work, where does it begin in terms of thinking about music this way? Because I think I interviewed someone about this maybe like five, no, probably like closer to 8 to 10 years ago. So it's been a long time.
Oh, yeah.
But like, how does composing adaptive music differ compared to just again traditionally composing a song that has a set beginning, middle, and end?
Yeah, that's totally true, and I believe that I don't have a correct answer to this question. But well, maybe not correct, but that's the wrong word for it. But the answer that would work in any situation, because when it comes to game design, it's like, first of all, we have multiple game types, right? Because we have things like strategy, like turn-based strategy, real-time strategy. We have RPGs, we have shooters, we have like arcade games, we have adventure games, which are third perspective. So there are so many genres, so many types of games, that it also affects how you think about creating adaptive music system and basically making a music design, which I believe it's super connected, and it's something that really comes from the game, not the other way around. Because we can imagine sometimes, or I can imagine when I start working on a game, I can imagine how it's gonna be, and I have this very untrue image of the music and of the adaptive music system in a game, and then when the reality hits, it turns out that it's completely wrong what I thought, and I have to think completely differently, like try to find completely new way of designing the system, because it's all of those things, all of those puzzles that I was imagining, that are completely in a different way, in a different place. Like, imagine this simple scenario: you have an adventure game, and you imagine that you are going to explore something for you are going to explore a world for like 20 minutes maybe, and then you finally hit into some combat area, and you may think that, okay, so maybe I have to make a lot of exploration music because it's going to be like the main part, and then it turns around completely, because you find out that during that explorations you have like 20 different small combats that just happen, and it completely changes the view of for you as a as a music designer, because it doesn't allow you to tell a story, or to create this sort of like a mood, and paint emotions of the environment, because there's no time for it, because you are still fighting. And this is true for many games, because very often when we start working on some games, it's like that. um, it's more like building something from blocks, and you have block A, block B, block C, and you imagine that you may have some smooth transitions from A, B, and C, and then eventually it's everything like mixed up completely, because of course game designers, they want the game to be exciting and very um uh not only exciting but also like complex, so it's not boring, that you are going from point A to point B to point C, because it's just simply boring. So they want to mix it up, everything. um, so when it comes to the music, it turns out that your first idea, your initial idea, was completely wrong, and you have to find a different way to do it. And sometimes even going into silence is better idea than using wrong music at certain point. Yeah, so going back to your question, because I completely gone off from it. What's probably the most challenging part is just finding the core of the gameplay, and trying to design a system that's gonna uh, that's gonna that's gonna make this entire music system very fluid, very smooth when it comes to changing the music. And you have to do it very quickly sometimes, which is very challenging, because the music very often, especially when it comes to music that has some melodies, that has um, some some very long phrases, it's very difficult to make it work when you want to changing all the time, like very quickly. So that's why these days, very often in many games, we use something that we could call ambient music. That it's more like texture based ambient, because it's much easier to escape from it and to switch to something else. Um, and also in those games that has many hours of the gameplay, sometimes even using silence is a good idea, and only and use music only in those places where you really want to emphasize something, like a combat, or maybe finding something that's important to the story. Of course, as I said before at the beginning, um, it's very much dependent on the game style, because you would probably think about music completely different when you work on turn-based strategy, which I actually worked on, like, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago or something. And I remember the music was completely like, plain. Like it wasn't even adaptive. It was just a loop that was like 10-minute long or something, because there was no need for the music to react that much to the gameplay, simply because the gameplay wasn't that fast, because it was almost like playing chess, so you don't want to be interrupted. This is also something that we sometimes forgot mm, when we want to do something exciting. We may forget that music can actually not cannot help, but can even um, take you off the gameplay, like, because it can disturb the gameplay if it's too if it's too dynamic. If
Mhm.
there's change every couple of seconds, and music is reacting to everything that you do, it can be distracting. uh, d- yeah, distracting.
That actually brings up an interesting question. So, when you're designing the music or designing the adaptive music, how do you decide is like what aspects you want the music to focus on? Like, let's say we're
Hmm.
like again, like something like with Mouse PI as an example, it is a first-person shooter, so the player's primary action is going to be running around, shooting, getting shot at, and of course reloading. So, like, given like something like that, how do you decide like what parts you want the music to change? So, as you said, if it's changing with like literally every single action, it's just going to sound like this like mess of instruments in the player's ears.
Yeah, that's totally true. And well, there are many different examples in here that I have in mind, but let me stick to something like more like strategy in the first place, okay? Because strategy is really great. Strategy, or something that's more like city builder,
Mm-hmm.
because this kind of gameplay r- really don't need that much adaptivity when it comes to the music. And most of the time, it needs to create this sort of background and just get you into the mood of the environment, or maybe get you into the mood of the specific storytelling aspect, like because some of the games still has this sort of like 3 act structure, like in any story. So maybe sometimes you want the music to emphasize that. But what I find interesting, and also I think I worked on a game on one game that used that idea that we were controlling the music by weather. So weather, and also changing the time, like the daytime. There was a different music for for sunset. There was different music for daytime. There was different music for night. Um, and also the weather was changing the music, and it was done very smoothly. So it was like just changing the volume of different layers in music, and we could do that because the music in that game was very ambient like. So there was no like specific musical structure in it. Of course there were some melodies, but it was very, very loose, in a sense of having phrases and having rhythms and anything that's anything that we think of when we think of music. Like most of the time when we think of music, we have things like harmony, we have rhythm, and we have melody, and sometimes counter melody. And in this case, when we have this sort of like ambient music, none of this is so important. So it's quite easy to smoothly change the music, so it all almost flows like water. So it changes, and you don't even realize sometimes that it's changing. Whereas we have an example like Mouse, which is closer to a boomer shooter. Um, it's something that doesn't really allow you to do something like this, that you could smoothly change something. It has to be very quick, because the gameplay is so quick and so dynamic that anything that you do with music has to work perfectly in sync, and also has to be done as fast as possible. Because in a 1 second you may start fighting, in other you may find a some sort of a clue. And we also have those sort of like accents, musical accents for those clues, and some other things in the gameplay. So, and also the biggest restriction in here actually was the style of the music as well, because you wouldn't be able to do anything like this if you would work on the music that's very restrictive in terms of mm, I mean the theory of music, because you have to make music in a specific way so it sounds accurate. It's not ambient music, so it needs that those drums, it needs that bass, it needs those horns. Everything has to be in place so it sounds as it's supposed to sound. Therefore, you just can't take out one of the layers and expect that it's gonna sound okay. You have to change everything. So in terms of this kind of game, uh, we actually needed to design specific musical arrangement that it works with the music design, so it reflects all of the changes that we need to done. So we had a lot of transitions, a lot of different parts that we could go from or to during the combat, and also to quickly switch to something like more exploration type of music. Of course, it's not something that I focused too much, because I knew that we're gonna need a lot of music and there's gonna be a lot of going on in the game. So I wasn't trying to make everything work as smooth as possible, because that would be just ridiculous and impossible to achieve with other limitations that we have. So sometimes you have to meet in a halfway in terms of trying to find the best sound and also make it work technically in the game. So mm, if you if you have any specific moment that you'd like me to describe, I can do it. But if you don't stop me, I can just mumbling about it for another 2 hours.
I guess like as an example then, like during like an arena fight, I think would be a good one to
Mhm.
discuss. Like, because arena fights in any shooter are always when things are going to be at their most dynamic. So, I guess like how do you approach like that kind of situation when you're composing music?
Yeah, so in this specific game, it was quite straightforward. I mean, I designed a specific music system for combat, and we try to stick with that for almost any combat that we have in a game. So it was like more like intensity related system. So you was able to change the combat intensity, whether you wanted to do it at the beginning of the combat or also in the fly, if you'd like. So this was something that worked really well, especially with the boss combats, because boss combats very often has those sort of like stages. So we could change the intensity of the music when we crossed the line and we changed to stage number 2 and 3. Um, but also it has this sort of backup, the combat system. It has this sort of like a backup part that allows you to get away from combat, and if you don't really fight with the enemy for quite some time, the music will just go a little bit lower, so it's not like hitting you all the time. And we use that a lot when we go from one arena to another, because it's very common for this game that we have like smaller arenas combined with each other. So you think that you finished a combat at certain point, but it's not really over, because while you cross some other door, you will find another room with a lot of enemies to fight with. So we use that also to make this sort of transition, so you don't really lose the groove of the combat music, but it's much softer. So it gives you this feeling that it's not over yet, but it's much less emotional and much less dynamic. So once you start the combat again, it pumps up again, and it hits you hard with the same groove that you previously had. Yeah, it's when it comes to the engine, like how it works, it's quite simple. However, it was quite difficult to make all of those transitions to work, because this type of music is very melodic, and every single time when you try to cut a melody somewhere in half, you can hear it basically. So it's something that you cannot really avoid. Of course, there are some ways to make it work, but it's not something that we would be able to do in this sort of like in the game.
Okay. And I guess like for something like this, how much do you I guess like collaborate with like the game designers or the level designers when you're trying to decide like how to compose music for like a specific section?
hmm yeah, that's a really great question. And again, there is no straight answer, because it really depends on the team and what the pipeline is. So every not only every game is different, but also every company and every team is a little bit different, and they may have a little bit different routine and a little bit different pipeline. So it's something that always needs some sort of working out and massaging a little bit here and there, so over the time we can find right way to do it, but at the beginning of the work, it's always sort of like back and forth, because once I have some sort of music idea, then I may find that the game designers, they actually created something that really doesn't allow my idea to be to work well, basically. So there's no point in doing this. And it's and it can be the other way around, but and especially when something changes, because game dev is very iterative process, and this is something that's probably the most challenging. That when you design something music wise, for the game that you've seen, and and you believe that it's going to work, eventually what happens is that you see that the game design has changed. So now this music system and the music that you created for it doesn't really work. So you have to find a way to do it. And again, as I said before, it's also really much related to the game, to the music style, because it would be much easier, at least in my view, of course, because if you ask any other composer, probably you will get maybe a little bit different answer. But at least for me, it would be much easier to get around those changes in the game design when I make more like ambient type of music and more electronic type of music. And it's much more difficult when we do something that's more organic and more traditional, things like this, mouse big band type of music, or something that's more orchestral, for instance, where you have a lot of melodies, a lot of things that's not really working well with sudden changes. So if I know from the start how eventually it's going to look, this would probably help me to avoid many mistakes that I do at the beginning, because I very often start working on a game when I don't really see how it's going to look like, because it's like very, very early design process. So I very often imagine something, and then when we eventually see how it goes, it's completely different. And that requires a lot of changes also in music. And that's probably the biggest challenge, because we have to very often do things twice or even many more times to make it finally work. And it's like chicken and egg situation, because you never know which one was first. But it's also fun, it's also fun to discover this, and it's also fun because it allows me mm, to make my music a little bit better eventually. Once I have a chance to redo it a couple of times, because every single time when you go back to something, you can improve it. So it can be difficult, but it's also but it's great, that we have a chance to do it.
I'm not sure there's like a standard answer for this one, but one thing I'm curious about, when I talk to like a few composers in the past who like worked on games, they discuss a lot about, the length of a song. It could be, 4 to 5 minutes, you know, 2 to 3, depending upon what's happening. When you're composing like adaptive music, is there like a standard length, or like how does like length factor in when you're building or you're composing a song that is supposed to be changing, when the player is shooting over here, or if the battle goes like this or something like that?
Yeah, this is also a very interesting question, because it's very much related to the music style. Uh, it's a little bit like what I said before. It's when we have this sort of like more ambient type of music, you can actually come around with, I believe, smaller amount of music, because you can have a lot of different layers, and you can just simply um, make this sort of impression that there is more music by randomizing some of those layers. And this is something that I very often do when I create music that it's more like texture based and more electronic, and even sometimes even with this sort of like orchestral type of music, but it's not specifically rhythmical, and the harmony isn't really dense, so it's like quite smooth and soft. Then it's quite easy to pretend that there is a lot of more music, because you can just randomize some of those layers, so that some of them turn off, some of them turn on, and this gives you this impression there is more music because something is changing, and this is great. But when it comes to music that's more like in mouse, for instance, it's really difficult to do it, because it's everything when it comes to the harmony and to the rhythm. Everything needs to fit, which means that you cannot really turn off something, because you will lose part of the harmony, and it won't be, it won't sound the same, and it won't, and in some occasions it may not even sound correct. So you cannot really do that. Therefore you need much more music, so you don't get bored with it. So in this case, I believe that there is no rule. Sometimes you may have a loop that it's like 2 minutes, and in some other cases you may need something that's more like 10 minutes, because you will just simply hear that it's repetitive, and of course we all want to avoid uh, this to be so audible that it's repetitive, right? We are trying to avoid it. Of course, it's inevitable. You will hear it anyway if you stay very long in single place. But this is something that for games that has a lot of exploration can be mm, can be worked out by using more silence. Actually, of course, if the gameplay allows you to do it.
Hmm.
So it's very much dependent on the game style, and you can design a system if you see that you have a lot of exploration that doesn't really require that much music. You can just simply turn into silence, and that's also going to be fine.
Hmm. And with like having like different games have like different styles, like go back to what we were talking about earlier, like a strategy or a city building game as a good one. That for a lot of strategy games, obviously there's not a lot happening until everything happens at once. And I guess like in that respect, how does like your own approach change, like with a game or a genre like that?
Yeah, well, it is something that it's actually mm, quite nice to do, because it's when you have a gameplay like that, it's quite straightforward. At least at least to me, because I can see that, okay, now we have like 20 minutes of gameplay and nothing really happens, right? Because you are building, you are doing something, you are managing different things, and you can even go into the silence at some point, or you can randomize some sort of silence within that gameplay. And when once something hits, like something happens and something changes, then you can just simply make a jingle for it, or as we call it, stinger. Mm, or it can be just a beginning for another cue, like for another track that you would start with that certain event. Of course, it depends what kind of event we are talking about. But if this is something that gonna change your gameplay at certain point, it can be just a trigger for another part of the music. And if this is something that is quite short but it's significant, that it could be just a place for a stinger, which would be just like an accent and then fades off, and you go back to normal. So yeah, so that's one of the ways how we do it. But of course, like I said before, I don't think there are like specific rules for certain things. It's more like what works in specific scenario, for in specific game.
With the idea of like going over and touching things up or making any edits or improvements. I guess like how do you approach that? Again, like for people listening, they know that I am not the best when it comes to like music and tone, anything along those lines. So for someone like yourself, like if like someone says like it's not working or they want you to make edits, like what's your approach to trying to like figure out how to improve like a piece?
Hmm. When something doesn't work, there can be different reasons because it not necessarily is the a problem with music itself. Sometimes it may be a problem with um, implementation and how it's executed. Because it's quite often to see that something happens in the game and the music didn't accent it or didn't react to it. And that's simply because it wasn't it wasn't designed in the first place. So maybe I missed something, you know. Or and when and when it is a problem with the music itself, it is very often for me to a chance to go back and just simply start over sometimes, because it may this may mean that the music is like maybe too too aggressive sometimes, and the gameplay doesn't really like that for in specific moment. Because sometimes it can be distractive for the player. And this is something that probably almost any of us is guilty of. That we very often want the music to be great, right? So we maybe override sometimes, and we want the music to be interesting, and sometimes it doesn't have to be, and sometimes it shouldn't be that interesting, because sometimes you need to make a place, to make a room for other things, like sound effects, or maybe dialogue, or maybe just simply solving a puzzle, because sometimes the player, when it's solving a puzzle type time, it's you want to be focused, right? So you don't want to interrupt the player with too complex music, because your brain needs a
Mhm.
break, and you need to focus on something. Yeah, so it's things like that. So sometimes it's going back to the composition, and sometimes it's just trying to tweak implementation, or even in some in some other cases, it could be thinking about even turning off the music because it's not required at some point.
Mhm. And with kind of like, I guess the other aspects when it comes to a game, like especially like sound effects, hit detection, that kind of thing. Is that a part that you work on, or do you focus predominantly like on like the music and the themes?
Oh no, I focus on music only, and it's really fun that you mention hit points and sound effects related to that, because this is something that in in perfect world I would always try to avoid, because I don't really like the moment when the music and sound effects they need to fight with each other. This is something that we very often try to avoid, not only because not only because it sounds bad, because you never know what to focus on, but also because sometimes it's not really important for one thing um, to be heard with another. Like, for instance, when you have a combat, and if this is a beginning of the game, uh, I would say that you don't really need music for that combat. Of course, like always, it depends on the game, but many times, especially at the beginning of the game, you don't really need that music on the combat, because it is so exciting to make to be in that first fight, that sound effects are doing great job, and you don't really need anything more. Whereas when you go to the end of the to the campaign or to the story or however you want to call it, you probably are very familiar with all of the sound effects and you already know how all of the weapons sounds, and it's not um it's nothing new and it's not so exciting anymore because you get so used to it that much. And on the other hand, when you go to you are preparing or you are moving to the final boss fight, you need that additional push. And this is the place where I believe that a game really sounds best when sound effects go down and the music goes up, because in that final moment you want to bring all of the emotion up, and music is the best tool to bring all of those emotions, and then those sound effects can go a little bit quieter. So in my view, the balance is very much related to the storytelling. And of course, sometimes you cannot avoid, because obviously you can't turn off sound effects at some point, but you can change the balance a little bit. Music, you can, right? You can turn off the music, and it won't be a problem if this is something that was designed the way as you want it. Yeah, so that's one of the things that I would consider when I start working and start planning a certain project. But of course, it's something that is very much related to the direction, to the art direction. So, not every game would have this kind of solution. And sometimes you really need um, to fight for a place in terms of audio spectrum. And the best way to do it, in my view, again, because it's very subjective, is if this is important for everybody, so that we have music from wall to wall and sound effects from wall to wall, and all of those needs to work together, would be to find the right, let's say, instruments or right sound palette for the music, so it's not really affecting, or rather not really fighting for the place with sound effects. Meaning that if you have very heavy explosions and gunfights and stuff like that, I would even consider not using that much of drums and anything that's percussive, because this is something that very often fights with sound effects, especially with those gun type of weapons, weapon sound effects and explosions and things like that. If you don't have those, because your gameplay and your fights are not causing any explosions, then fine. Then maybe you could use those drums and things that are very heavy in low end. But yeah, it's as you can tell right now from those examples that I brought up. It's very much dependent on the game style and the setting of the game.
Hmm. And as you're saying, with kind of like having like different instruments based on, like kind of like the situation at hand, in that respect, like this was something that I talked with another composer about. In terms of like the instruments, when it comes to adaptive music, are there any particular instruments that like work better or worse when you're trying to like compose, like in this respect?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Like, when it comes to the color, instrument basically is a color in this case. So it doesn't really affect the adaptive music system at all. The thing that can affect adaptive music system is using long melodies. This is something that's the biggest challenge when you want to change something quickly. And I know examples from some AAA games where they recorded like dozens and hundreds of transitions, so they could actually switch the music from one to another without losing this natural ending of the phrase. But this is something that's really out of our reach when we are working on some indie game, because this can multiply the amount of music that you have planned for the game. And yeah, and this is probably something that I would consider the most challenging. If your music is more rhythm oriented and texture oriented, it's much more easier to switch from one to another, and this can be something that easily can be fixed with some, even when you use a transition like a, like a symbol. You can even put some sort of symbol transition on it, and it can just smooth out the transition. Of course, it's not maybe the best way to do it, because it's kind of simple and maybe even simplistic, but it works. It works. It helps you to smooth out the transition.
Mhm. And I don't think there's any other like major questions. I guess in terms of like working with the developers, I guess like how does this process start? Do they like approach you saying, "We're building a level, let's say, takes place in a saloon, and we're looking for music to fit," or this level is going to be like, if, for example, Mouse Pie, there's a swamp level. Like, how does this begin to take shape?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because it's something that it's not really related to the game style in this case, but more to the team and to the pipeline of specific company. Because sometimes when I'm involved in a game production, even though I'm like composer, and I supposed to be responsible for delivering music, I almost act like a music director, because I tend to decide what we actually going to do in terms of music, and developers simply give me this free freedom to do it, and they trust that I will do it the best as possible. And this is something that's very it's very rewarding, because it allows me to really find some solutions for specific design elements, game design elements. And I often ask everybody to test things, so that maybe I will prepare some sort of music design prototype for this specific mechanic, and for that, and maybe we could test it so that we hear and see how it works. And if there's time and we can do this, it's really rewarding, because I can immediately see that my idea was completely wrong, and I can start over, and I can just make it right the second time. Yeah, because it's related to what I said before. It's very often what I do is based on some sort of imagination, how I believe it's going to work in a game. And when you see it and when you play it, uh, your mm, your view can change a little bit, and sometimes not even a little bit. It can be completely different. Yeah, and to answer your question, also, some other times I may um, been asked to do something specific. So because sometimes there could be a person in the studio that it's more um, music sensitive, if I can say that. So they already know that they would need this certain type of music and specific solution, like adaptive music solution for things. But it's always very collaborative process. It's never like I'm forced that you have to do this and that, and you have no right to to say no. It's very often very collaborative process.
And I guess with as you were talking about earlier, with like working on the music before you actually like see like the game itself. I guess with Mouse Pie, but again, we can avoid anything like NDA breaking. How early did you kind of like join up to work on the game or to compose the music for the game?
It's very different every single time. I remember some games that I was involved very very late, like almost 2 months before the, maybe not the release, but the content log, and some other very early, at the moment when nothing really was there yet, so there was not much to talk about. None of those is great. Like of course, we all say. I mean, we composers, we always say that it's better to be involved earlier, and this is true, because we have much more time to find some inspiration, to look for things. I mean, like musical ideas, and simply fill in the game a little bit more with time, because the view can change over time as well. It's not only related to the fact that the game is changing, but even though that you are seeing something and experiencing something over and over again for a year or two, it also allows you to evolve a little bit and develop some new ideas and some new mm, uh, sorry, I just
Mhm.
completely lost the word which I wanted to use. But basically what I mean is that it's when you have much more time, uh, it's much more possible that you will find this project. You will grow into it in a way, so it will start at some point. You will start breathing with it, if you know what I mean. It's like, it becomes your part of you, in a sense, because when we don't really have that time, we need to rely on some, let's say, um very rough snippets, or just we can imagine how this music would work and how the game would work. And sometimes, when you have very good intuition, sometimes you may do it right. You may hit those good notes, uh, but you never know. And when you have more time, even though it's much more, of course, time consuming, and it requires a lot of more effort, probably will give you much more better results, because you simply grew into the project in a way. But the biggest challenge probably here, when you are very early on, in the project, is that you don't really know how this game gonna look when you end up. It's very early and nobody knows how it's gonna be, because everybody's improvising. Everybody, of course, there is always some sort of plan, but it's very often changed. Like it changes all the time up to certain moment. So you may end up scoring completely different game that you started.
And I'm trying to think if there's any other like remaining questions about kind of adaptive music. So I guess from your side, anything regarding the process of composing adaptive music that we haven't discussed that you would like to bring up?
Mm, yeah, well, there's plenty of it, actually. There's plenty of it, and I don't even know how to start. First of all, it's fun. It's something that it's really fun, and but you have to have time to make it fun, because if there is, like in the example that I used before, if there's just like 2 months to content log, you don't really have the time to experiment with anything. You just have to start, go and deliver anything that you can, to make it all work, especially if there's a lot of music that's required. But what I really love about adaptive music system is playing around with different middleware settings. When trying different things and experimenting a little bit. And for those of you who don't know this, we mostly use two middlewares. Like there is Fmod and there is Wise. And I'm like 100% Wise fan, because this this middleware allows me to do anything that I can imagine. Like there's not much that I can't do in that environment. Of course, there are some limitations, like always, but those limitations are not really that much coming from the software itself, but more from the adaptive aspect of music. Those things that I mentioned before, things like that you don't really want to cut your phrase in the middle because you will hear it. And this is something that you cannot really go around without using like dozens of custom transitions to make it work. So this is something that's really often well, we just live with it. Like we know that it's like that, and we just tend um, to focus on different things which we can actually improve. But when it comes to some other things, like one of the challenges that I love is designing a music system that it's more like how could I describe it? It's very musical in a way. What I mean is that the music needs to change in specific rhythm, a little bit like doing some sort of like Guitar Hero type of thing. Uh, when you need to change very quickly the music, and it all needs to work perfectly aligned and synced. And I just remind myself of a game that I worked on a couple of years ago. It was again quite small indie game. It was called the Death Roads, and it was like a racing game, but cardboard racing game. So you would simply play cards, but you would see those cars in the background, and they would change. They would change the position and to do certain things when you pick a specific card, or where you pull a specific card. And I remember that I had a lot of fun working on that game, even though it was quite simple. But it allowed me to make those very musical transitions. Like you would start with some sort of like a verse, because this entire game was. Um, we had this idea that we would make the music to sound like it's coming from the radio, but in the same time we wanted the music to be adaptive, so it's not exactly like it's coming from the radio, right? So we had to somehow marry those two worlds, making it pretend that it's coming from the radio but also reacting to the gameplay. And it was quite diverse when it comes to the style, but it was, let's say, more rock oriented because of course it's cars. uh, but I remember I had a lot of fun working on that game because I was able to prepare a lot of different transitions so that you can very quickly go from, let's say, from verse to chorus, and then back from chorus to the verse, and then maybe turn to verse number two, to the bridge, then go back and to outro. So it was very, very, it wasn't even that much adaptive. It was almost interactive because it was really interacting with the player. And I had a lot of fun working on it. However, it was fun because it was very much rhythm based. It's if I would put like a flute melody on there or something that needs to fade off smoothly, it wouldn't be that great. So again, it's very much related to the style of the music, because some styles are much easier to be split, or to be I mean the music chunks can be split into some smaller pieces, and you can rearrange them and they may still work. While in some other styles, you just can't do this because you will hear that it's not natural.
In terms of like technology, you mentioned of course Wise and Fmod. Has there been like any like changes like to like the technology to make it like easier or to compose, or has it kept relatively standard over the years?
Oh yeah, it's changing all the time, and Fmod and Wise, they proved it, and they prove it all the time for many years now, uh, because I can't remember what was the beginning of Fmod and Wise, in which year they started. But before that, everybody would just implement music directly in game engine. which still up to this moment is much more difficult and much more clunky in a way. Of course, it depends on the engine, but I know that in the newest Unreal Engine, it's much better these days. But nevertheless, it's it's what you can do in FMOD and Wise. It's much more complex and much more accurate to what we expect from the music to sound like. Because it's something that's probably very often um, uh, misunderstood, that if you need to make music implementation in the game, the only thing that you need is changing the music volume or something like this, or maybe to uh, crossfade quickly between different wave files or something like that. And this is much more complex. You need to synchronize those assets to the tempo, to the right time signature. Sometimes those tempos are changing, so this is something that it's not that easy to be done without that middleware. And even though those two middlewares are very, very powerful, probably one is better than the other in certain areas, because I'm not saying that the Wise is best for everything, because sometimes, of course, I love it and maybe I'm biased, but sometimes when some simple things are concerned, maybe FMOD is better way, because it just allows you to achieve certain things quicker, and they things that don't really have to be that complex.
And I think with that, I'm just about out of questions. I guess for yourself, one thing we talked about before we start recording, are there any like examples of adaptive music that inspired you in other video games?
Oh, sure, yeah, there are plenty of them, and I'm a huge fan of all Remedy games, not only when it comes to the games themselves, but also to the music design. And I know that they have quite huge audio team, so they design the music systems by themselves in collaboration with the composer. And I remember a certain moment in Quantum Break, which I loved so much. Well, it's kind of old game now, but still, I believe that the audio, not only audio, but the music, adaptive music system in that game is superb. It's like
Mhm.
it's it's so complex, and it changes. I mean, it changes the music in a background in a way that you are not even aware that it's been changing. It's like you are listening to it and you believe that the composition is just like that. And that's the aim for many of us, that we hear the music coming from the game and we don't even hear that it's been changed in a way by the gameplay. You just hear it and you just think that it was recorded this way. And as for the Quantum Break, I remember this moment when I get into the. I think I can tell you some spoilers because it's quite an old game, but I remember when I came into the time machine, which was like a huge ring shaped corridor, and if you turned right. In that time machine, and you went right way in the corridor, you would hear music playing forward. And when you moved back, turn around and go left, the music would reverse and play backwards. And then when I first heard it, it was like, my mind just exploded. It was huge. It was like, of course, it wasn't that difficult to be done from technical standpoint, because they probably used some reversed waves, and they found the right place where to switch it. But the way how it works in the game, it's just mind blowing for me. Of course, it's not something that could be catched up by anyone, but it doesn't have to be. You just need to. Most of the players, they don't really react that specifically to the music, because they just focus on the gameplay. And that's the real beauty of it, that you play the game and you hear those things without even realizing that it's been designed this way. You just enjoy the gameplay. But of course, when I play the game, I very often pay attention to what's happening to the music, because that's also my job. So I always try to find some sort of inspirations in those games. And I'm also a huge fan of a composer, Olivier de Rivière, uh, which um, which is uh, which is very advanced music designer. Like, all of the games that he works on are very deeply adaptive. I mean, the music is very deeply adaptive. It's like all of those systems that he designs are just massive, and I'm a huge fan of him. um, I also really enjoy how the music was done in all of the Jedi series, the recent Jedi series, like the Fallen Order and the Survivor, and mostly because I can't imagine how they've done it, but because most of the music, as I recall from some interviews with Gordy Hub, um, they've done with live orchestra, which means that they didn't have access to all of the parts, to all of the stems, because they recorded the orchestra in the room. And when you make adaptive music system, you very often need to go very granular. Like, you need to have all of those single tracks, all of those stems, all of those layers, to be able to prepare some of those specific transitions, and make them work, make them smooth. And it turns out that you don't really have to, because they did it somehow and it works beautifully in those games. I mean, those transitions are really great. I can't remember even a single moment in the game that I would heard that the music changes without having this sort of like natural ending or something. It's, well, maybe in some places it fades out because it needs to, but other than that, it works really beautifully. It's and I would really love to know how they've done it, because I would steal it.
And like with Remy, like for myself, I think for a lot of people listening, like going through, of course, Alan Wake 2 with Herald of Darkness, and of course the Ashtray Maze from Control, are probably like two of the highlights for me.
Yeah, sure, of course. And the music system in Control is, and in Alan Wake, they are even more advanced, I believe. It's something that they went really granular, and if I'm not mistaken, they also use Wise, like most of the bigger companies, because it's the most advanced system for us. The best, it's like uh, when you are a kid, you want those toys to play around with, and these days, to me, it's like opening Wise. You have all of those toys, and you can just simply have fun with them and see what happens. Sometimes even just playing around with it without any clue what you want to do, but just like rolling a dice and seeing what happens.
Now, as you said earlier, obviously you're working on a lot of upcoming projects that are going to probably be NDA related. Is there anything that you can like tease or anything like that for people listening?
I'm sorry, but I think not. All of those things that I'm working right now, they're not even announced yet. So yeah, it would be quite difficult for me to say anything about it without spoiling.
All right. In that case, one other question then. Do you have any favorite song that you composed for Mouse PI?
Oh, for mouse. I think oh Bowie. That's the difficult one. It's kind of silly, because there is always something that you love the most, but when it comes to those games that I recently worked on, and I mean, in any given moment when I finish a project, it's like it's so early that it's really hard to decide what was the best, because uh, feelings are moving from one way to another. Like at one moment you may think that everything is just trash and it's not worth of anything, and the other day you may think that it's actually not that bad. But now when I think about it, uh, I believe that I'm probably the most happy with the Jack Pepper's theme, the main theme for the main character, simply because it's very like cinematic, like film type of theme, something that could be even part of a film. And this is something that I really love doing in many games, if only if I can, of course, is to use this sort of very simple and but very engaging melody that I can use multiple times in a game, that can remind the player of something or can be brought up whenever something important to the story is happening. And in this case, we've been using this Jack Pepper's theme, which early days we called just detective theme, for all of the places or of the moments in the game when we find a clue or when something like pushing story forwards happening. And it's like, this is the sneaky kind of like, yeah, I wanted the melody to be funny, and at the same time to be like, to give you this impression of looking for something, like, looking for a clue.
I guess final question for you then before we wrap things up. Do you have anything you'd like to say to any composers, people studying or wanting to get into music or games to take us out?
Well, I don't know. What could I say? It's just like, enjoy it, guys. It's really fun to be able to make music, and it's really rewarding to do it sometimes. Of course, it's not always easy, but probably most of the time it's not easy, but can be very rewarding. And I'm really happy that, especially these days, so many games are being done that so many of us can actually make that have that great experience of making games. So to any of you that are playing instrument or trying to compose or doing anything of that, I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best, and make sure to not only to be like the best in your craft, but also don't forget to have fun with it.
I think that is a great point to wrap up. So, for you, Patrick, anything social media wise you like to mention? Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm almost everywhere. Like, I think I don't have a TikTok yet, and I don't know if I ever will, because there are just too many of those social media these days. I have Instagram, which I tend to put some photos if I have some recording sessions and any other interesting events, music wise. But I'm also on Facebook, and of course I have a LinkedIn. Like uh, every working person these days. And I also have my homepage, which is scelina.com, and you may find any other links out there, like to any of my social medias, to Spotify, to Bandcamp, because I'm on most of those websites and streaming services.
Well, I think with that, we can wrap things up for tonight. So, for your projects that you are working on, best of luck with them.
Thank you very much for invitation, and see ya next
Mm.
time.
All right. Yeah. And if you're free in the future to discuss anything, feel free to reach back out and we can certainly chat. All right. So, for those of you watching, hopefully at a far earlier hour than when we're recording, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, through the YouTube big stuff, check out the Discord, Patreon, all the books, and so on. As I said at the start, if you're interested in coming on to talk about any aspect of game dev or game you're working on, be sure to get in touch. And with that, come back for the discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you some the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night.